Oh, I'm making a podcast of my own, just to, switch it up a little bit. Because no offense to Beyonce, but when I make a podcast with him, it it's not really a wisdom podcast. If you know, it's more like a fun podcast. There's tangents. There's not like a s- something that sticks to the script or anything. So I gotta occasionally leave put in a podcast where it's just me talking ever so often to stick to the premise of the podcast, which is me being very, very wise. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about how sadly, well, maybe not sadly for some people, but definitely sadly for some, maybe. But I'm going to be talking about religion again. I'm sorry. But you could, like I said before in a podcast before, you can only talk about wisdoms for so long until it starts becoming more religious talking. But the thing I wanted to talk about was, like a proof of God. And I've said before that the thing that always kind of bothers me about the Bible per se, or any of these certain holy books, rather that be Abrahamic or even Hindu or Buddhist or whatever, is that sometimes the rules or the lessons taught or the punishments don't make sense. And not in the where it's a bad thing or where you're like, oh, I just can't believe this kind of thing. But it just doesn't make sense. Why would a God say this, or like an all-knowing being, or why would a God, be bothered by this kind of thing? So, I can give an example. Of course, it's going to be more Abrahamic when I give an example. But an example of this is how Abrahamic religions are very against, say, homosexuality. Where, to me, you know, I don't think a God would really care. It doesn't really mess up the order of things. It's not like over 70% of the population is gay or something. It's like a very, it's a minority of people who are gay. So it's not like the population is going to decline or something. It's not like they're taking away options for other people. It's like a non-issue. So it's weird that, say, for example, someone just being gay would give them eternity in hell, for example. That it doesn't really make sense. Why would a God care? So things like that, or there are many other rules like that, say the certain views of women and stuff like that, where it's it doesn't make sense. And to me, I don't think personally that God should not make sense to someone who is a pure dumb little human. Everything that a God does should make perfect sense, if anything, because it's a God. It should make so much sense that it's almost impossible for it to not make sense. It should just almost just flow, where you're just like, wow, that makes so much sense. So then I think, okay, then what are examples of things that do just make so much sense, that are just where it's just wow, only a God could think of something like this? And an example of that, I would think, is, for example, math, nature, some of the sciences, these things that technically humans discover. We don't create, we discover it. Where we're for example, nature, where you're like, wow, that's amazing that, say, for example, the cycle of life, where, say, predators are around to make sure the herbivores do not overpopulate. Herbivores are around to help spread around the seeds of the trees. So, the trees, or not the trees, but the plants can help pollinate, or, spread their seeds around, or how the bugs help with pollination, where everything has an order, everything makes sense, everything has a purpose. For example, say humans, we breathe in the oxygen, or not humans, but animals in general, we breathe in the oxygen that the plants produce, and they take in the carbon dioxide that we produce. And it's there's this cycle of life, everything is kind of started off because of the sun. The sun's energy cascades down to the plants' energies cascade down to the herbivores cascade down to the carnivores die, and they're them being decomposed helps, like bugs or freaking mushrooms or whatever, or like how, say for example, plants, they they take in, for example, the decomposing of the bodies and everything. Like, that helps with the nutrients of the plants. Like, there's just such a beautiful synergy to it, where you're just like, only, for example, a god could create something that is that perfect. Because, like, obviously, for example, a human could not make something like that. Like, where it just makes so much sense. Where you're just like, wow, this is beautiful. Or say even colors. Like how the colors of, say, for example, nature, it just goes together. Like you could say that maybe it's because we evolved to like these colors. But still, like if you go to a mountainside or a lake or even say the desert, sometimes the desert, like where you're just like in nature and you're just like, wow, this is beautiful. Like, how is this created? Like, not even like how is this created? It's just like it's breathtaking. The oceans, even some of the creatures, like where you're just like, wow, these creatures are just so unique. It's so beautiful. Everything just works. That I think is an example of like a God's creation or something like that. Even say stuff like math, even though, it's kind of cringe saying math, but still like where something like math where you're like, wow, like, like these optimizations, nature's already doing the optimizations that we discovered, like, certain path finding or certain derivative or certain patterns or geometric series or whatever. We're like, wow, we just discovered this. It took years and years to, find a proof to prove that this works. And nature's been doing this all along. We're like, wow, that's beautiful. This is just beautiful. Oh, we see it in space. Wow, these certain patterns show up in space. Oh, this is beautiful. Where it just all makes sense. That I think is proof of God's creation or something beyond ourselves, even if it's not like an actual being, an actual persona of God, but it's like something of perfection, if that makes sense. Something that has like a perfection to it. But when I read to bring it back, when I read like certain books or certain Bibles or certain beliefs, there's always like something that doesn't make sense. Like even say for Abrahamic religions, like the Jewish religion, where like there's a belief, of course, that the Jews are, the holy people. They are the true chosen ones of God, or blah, 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 blah. They own the land. God kind of focused on specifically the Jews for, all of modern century or like the modern age of religion or whatever. Like, like Jesus was a Jew, obviously freaking Abraham and Noah and blah, blah, blah. They all come from the same family. This certain families always focused on, where I'm like, to me, I'm like, that doesn't really make too much sense, because why would a God focus on just one particular set of humans? Rather that be Jewish, rather that be Asian, rather that be black, rather that be white, rather that be Hispanic, rather that be freaking Filipino, whatever. It doesn't make sense that if it truly is a God and we're all truly human, why would it focus on just one of us? Like maybe some of them can impress. We're like, oh, wow, they deserve a little reward. But why would it say, when it gets to that whole chosen one thing, like, oh, this is the chosen lineage, it's when I turn off, where I'm like, okay, this is starting to be written by man. It even comes with the ancient religions, like where, whatever it's called, freaking, I forgot his name already, but the Mesopotamian, whatever, where they're like, oh, actually, this is based on this certain location, like, this was the cult of blank, and that's how they started, fighting to fight for the gods, whatever, where you're like, oh, I'm not sure. That doesn't make sense. That just seems like human cringe, trying to make themselves look more special than, they really are. And everyone tries to wants to be special in some way. So it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense for a God to care. So that's the only thing. That's the thing that I kind of wanted to like talk about, or like, express that kind of belief in like how certain things might be proof of God, certain things might not. And to make things like, to end it all on a note, it makes me wonder, like, because this religion is kind of like, the whole purpose of religion is kind of about the fear of death, because you don't know what happens. No one knows what happens afterwards. So it makes me wonder if truly there is a God,
and like say my theories are correct, that like, proof of God is stuff that just makes so much sense that it's hard to like even say why, or like to be like, huh, that doesn't make sense, because everything that God does should make almost perfect sense to someone like us, because the God is so much more superior, so much smarter, blah 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 blah. So what I want to say is just that it makes me wonder then, like say death itself, I wonder like once we die, because who knows what happens, rather that's a new journey, rather that's being recreated to something, who knows. But if we knew, like let's just say somehow we figured out what happens after death, we somehow scientifically proven it, we found it in the article, someone from death came back or whatever, when if that happened, it would make perfect sense then. Like whatever happens after death would be beautiful in a way. It would almost make you cry, where you'd be like, wow, that makes so much sense. Like that only a God could create death, I guess, because you would be like, wow, it's just so, it has such a synergy. It makes so much sense. So yeah, that's just what I want to say. That's my little wisdom, my religious wisdom. I'm not sure how you'll take it. I'm not sure if anyone would get anything from it, but that's how I view it. So yeah, that's about it. Wisdom out.